Think of something you have been trying to act as if about, a relationship, money, a version of yourself you keep rehearsing in your head. Notice the feeling underneath it right now. Not the words you use, the actual feeling. Was it solid or was it a performance? Hoping the performance would eventually convince you. If it felt like a performance, that is not your failure. That is the entire technique being taught wrong everywhere. For years, act as if was never about behavior. It was never about what you do with your hands, your face, your voice. Behavior was only ever supposed to be the leftover, the residue of a feeling that already happened inside you first. Most people get this backwards. They think if they walk taller, speak slower, smile more, the feeling will eventually catch up, so they perform. In meetings, in mirrors, in conversations with people who knew the old version of them, and it never settles, because a performance, no matter how convincing, still requires a part of you standing outside it, watching, checking if it is working. Think of two people in the same meeting. One of them is acting confident, shoulders back, voice controlled, eye contact held a half second too long. On purpose. You can almost see the effort behind it. Like a held breath. The other person says less, sits still. There is no performance happening at all, because there is nothing left to prove. Their confidence is not behavior. It is simply the temperature of the room they are standing in, internally, before they walked in. That is the entire difference between acting as if and actually assuming a state. One requires energy to maintain. The other requires nothing, because nothing is being held up. It is simply being lived from. Most people never see this difference because they were taught to copy the outside of confidence instead of locating the inside of it. They study posture, they study tone. They study what successful people do with their bodies and try to reverse engineer a feeling from the outside in. But a feeling cannot be built from gestures, the same way a fire cannot be built by arranging smoke. The gesture is what is left over after the fire is already burning. This is the first correction. Stop trying to perform the smoke. Find the fire first, quietly, internally, and let the behavior happen on its own without effort. The way warmth radiates from something already lit. There is a second piece nobody explains properly, and it is the actual mechanism behind why this works at all. When it works, your nervous system does not file experiences by whether they really happened. It files them by how vividly they were felt. This is why a single embarrassing memory from years ago can still tighten your chest today, even though nothing about that moment is currently true. The body kept the feeling. It discarded the timestamp. This works in the other direction too, and this is the part almost nobody uses correctly. If you can generate a feeling vividly enough, calmly enough, repeatedly enough, your nervous system begins treating it the same way it treats a memory, not as something you are hoping for, as something that already happened. Think of an athlete lying still before a competition, eyes closed, running through the exact movements of a perfect performance. Their heart rate changes, their muscles fire in small, measurable patterns, the same patterns that would fire if they were actually moving. Their body cannot fully tell the difference between a vividly imagined action and a physically executed one. This is not a metaphor. This is documented, repeatable, and it is the entire mechanical reason assuming a feeling can shape behavior, perception, even outcomes, because the nervous system is already responding to it as real. Now apply that to acting as if. The people who fail at it are trying to convince their conscious mind with logic, repeating a sentence, hoping repetition alone does the work. The people who succeed are doing something different. They are generating the actual sensory feeling of the wish fulfilled, the weight of it, the relief of it, the calm of it, until the body stops asking whether it is real. Once the body stops asking, the mind has no argument left to make. This is why some people get results from a single deeply felt assumption, while others repeat affirmations for a year and feel nothing shift. It was never about repetition. It was about vividness. The same vividness your nervous system already uses every day to keep old, painful memories alive without your permission. You are simply learning to aim that same machinery on purpose, towards something you have chosen, instead of something that happened to you. There is a third trap, and this is where most people quietly sabotage the entire process without realizing it. They change the behavior and skip the state completely. Think of someone who decides to assume wealth. So they buy something expensive, a coffee they cannot really justify, a jacket meant to make them feel like the version of themselves who already has money. For a few minutes it works, the way a costume works. Then the bill comes, or the bank app opens, and the feeling collapses instantly, because nothing on the inside ever actually changed. The purchase was behavior. The behavior was supposed to be evidence of an internal state that was never built in the first place. This is the quiet difference between decorating your life to look like the wish fulfilled and actually living from the feeling of it. One is addition. You are adding objects, gestures, words, hoping they accumulate into belief. The other is identity. You are not adding anything. You are simply occupying a feeling so completely that the external world has no choice but to start rearranging itself to match it. This is also why acting as if so often feels exhausting before it works. People are trying to hold up a performance with willpower, instead of resting inside a feeling that requires no effort to maintain once it is genuinely felt. Willpower runs out. Feeling does not. Because feeling is not something you are doing. It is something you are being. Here is what this actually means for you. The technique was never broken. It was simply taught as a set of actions to perform, when it was always meant to be a state to enter, quietly, privately, completely, before a single visible thing changes. This sounds simple when you hear it. It is far less simple when you try to live it, because entering a feeling fully, without performing it, without narrating it, without checking if it is working, asks something of you that posture and affirmations never did. It asks you to actually let go of the version of you that does not have it yet. And once you actually enter that state instead of performing around it, something uncomfortable usually happens next, because the world you are currently standing in does not yet match the state you just assumed. And that gap between what you now feel internally and what your eyes still see externally is where most people quietly give the assumption back. That is where we go next. The moment you assume a new state, your eyes do not get the memo right away. You feel the wish fulfilled internally, calm, complete, certain, and then you look up, and the world in front of you still looks exactly like it did yesterday. This gap is not a flaw in the technique. This gap is the technique working exactly as it should, because nothing in your outer reality was ever going to update before your inner state did. But almost nobody is taught to expect this gap. So when it appears, they interpret it as proof that the assumption failed. Think of someone who has just assumed wealth, not performed it, actually felt the calm, the ease, the quiet relief of having enough. They close their eyes, breathe out, and for a moment, something genuinely shifts inside them. Then they open their banking app out of habit, the way you check a wound to see if it has healed. The number on the screen has not changed. Same balance, same warning notification about a low account. And in that instant, the assumed feeling and the visible evidence sit directly across from each other, like two people who do not agree, forced into the same room. Most people resolve that disagreement by abandoning the assumption. They look at the number and quietly tell themselves the feeling was naive, a fantasy, something to be embarrassed about. The number wins because the number is loud, immediate, and familiar. The feeling loses because the feeling is new, and anything new feels fragile next to anything familiar. But here is what almost nobody explains. The number was always going to be the last thing to change, not the first. It is not evidence against your assumption. It is simply old information still circulating, waiting its turn to be replaced by something newer. Checking the bank app after assuming wealth is not a neutral act. It is, every single time, a small referendum on which version of reality you are willing to believe, the one your senses report, or the one you just generated and held with your whole attention. Notice how often the checking itself becomes the habit that undoes the work, not the assumption. The checking, every time you go looking for proof before the gap has had time to close. You are not gathering information. You are casting a vote against the very state you just spent effort building. The number was never going to argue back. It simply sat there, unchanged, and let your own attention do the damage on its behalf. This same conflict shows up just as sharply in relationships. And it is often more painful because the evidence there is not a number. It is a person. Think of someone who has assumed the relationship is healed. They have done the inner work. They picture warmth between them and the other person, easy conversation, forgiveness, closeness restored. They genuinely feel it. In the quiet moments, in meditation, in the version of the conversation they imagine before sleep. Then a text arrives, short, cold. The same clipped tone that has been there for weeks, and the entire assumed feeling. The warmth they just spent 20 minutes building internally collapses in under 3 seconds, replaced by the old, familiar ache of being unwanted. This is the exact moment most people quit the technique without realizing they quit. They do not announce it. They simply stop assuming and start reacting. Because reacting to the cold text feels more honest than holding on to a feeling the other person has not yet confirmed. But notice what is actually happening here. The other person's tone is old information. It reflects the relationship as it existed before your internal state changed, not after. People do not update instantly. The same way a bank balance does not update instantly. The same way a body does not heal the moment you decide to feel better. There is a delay built into every living system, and a single cold message during that delay is not proof the assumption failed. It is simply proof the delay has not finished yet. The mistake is not feeling the sting of the cold text. The sting is human, automatic, unavoidable. The mistake is letting the sting cast a vote on what you are allowed to assume next. One cold reply is not a referendum on your entire assumed reality. It is one data point from a world that has not caught up, being mistaken for a verdict. There is a specific moment where this entire process quietly falls apart, and it almost never announces itself as doubt. It announces itself as being realistic. This disguise is what makes it so effective. Doubt, when it is obvious, is easy to resist. You can recognize fear, recognize panic, recognize the voice that says this will never work. But realism wears a calmer mask. It sounds responsible. It sounds like maturity. It says things like, I should manage my expectations, or I do not want to set myself up for disappointment, or I am just being practical. And underneath that calm, reasonable voice, the assumption gets quietly handed back piece by piece, disguised as wisdom instead of what it actually is, which is fear protecting itself from the vulnerability of fully believing in something before it visibly arrives. Here is the test that exposes it. Realistic thinking. The genuine kind is neutral. It does not flinch. It simply observes facts without an emotional agenda attached to them. But the realism that shows up right after you assume a new state is rarely neutral. It has a flavor. It tastes like relief. The specific relief of being allowed to stop trying, to stop holding the feeling, to go back to the familiar identity that never asked this much of you. That relief is the giveaway. Genuine realism does not relieve you of effort, because it was never fighting your assumption in the first place. Disguised doubt does, because its entire purpose was to talk you out of the discomfort of holding a feeling the world has not yet confirmed. This is the real reason acting as if fails for most people. Not lack of belief, not lack of effort, but a repeated, quiet surrender disguised as good sense, every single time the evidence took a little too long to arrive. The ones who eventually see this technique work are not the ones who never feel the gap. They feel it every time. What separates them is far simpler and far harder. They keep assuming anyway, through the cold text, through the unchanged number, through every reasonable voice offering them a graceful exit back into the old identity. Because somewhere underneath the discomfort, they understand something the doubting voice does not want them to remember. The gap is not evidence the assumption is wrong. The gap is simply the space your old reality needs to dissolve in before the new one is allowed to take its place. This is uncomfortable to hear because it means there is no shortcut around the waiting. No version of this where the bank balance updates the moment you feel calm about it. No version where the cold text turns warm overnight simply because you decided to assume otherwise. The only thing that changes the timeline is what you do inside the gap itself. Whether you keep handing the assumption back every time reality looks unconvinced, or whether you let the feeling stay exactly where you placed it, undisturbed, until it is the only thing left standing. That dissolving is where we go next. There is a precise moment when an assumption stops being something you are doing and becomes something you simply are. Nobody can tell you exactly when it happens, because it does not happen in the part of you that is watching for it. It happens underneath, in the part of your mind that never asked permission to believe anything in the first place. Here is the clearest evidence that this has occurred, and almost nobody is told to look for it. Your dreams change, not because you forced them to, because you stopped having to force anything. Think of someone who has been assuming a different career, a different income, a different sense of capability. For weeks, during the day, the assumption is effortful. They have to choose it. Replace the old thought, sit with the new feeling, redirect attention every time doubt knocks. Then one night, without trying, they dream themselves already there. Not dreaming about wanting it, not dreaming about working toward it, simply living inside it. The way you live inside your actual life. Unremarkable, assumed, complete. They wake up slightly disoriented. The way you do after a dream so ordinary. It almost did not register as a dream at all. That disorientation is the signal. Your subconscious does not dramatize what it has already accepted as true. It only dramatizes what it is still negotiating. The moment the assumption stops requiring negotiation. Even in sleep, even when no one, including you, is supervising it, is the moment you can say with certainty, this is no longer an act. This is who you have become. While you are not looking, most people chase this moment consciously, lying awake at night trying to dream on command, trying to script the proof before the proof is ready to arrive. But you cannot manufacture this kind of dream. You can only create the conditions for it. The repeated calm felt assumption during the day, and then release control of what your mind does with it once you are no longer steering. When the dream eventually comes, it does not feel like a manifestation. It feels like memory, and that, more than any technique, more than any repetition, is the first undeniable proof that the assumption has moved from something you think to something you are. This is also why the dream carries more weight than any daytime effort ever could. During the day, you are still the author, choosing the thought, redirecting the focus, deciding what to believe on purpose. At night, the author goes quiet. What remains is simply what your mind now considers normal, without an audience, without anyone left to perform for. A dream cannot be talked into existence by willpower, which is exactly why, when it arrives unprompted, it carries more proof than 1,000 deliberate repetitions ever could. This same shift shows up while you are fully awake, in a place even less dramatic than a dream, your own habits. Think of someone who has been assuming they are the kind of person who handles money with ease, calm, capable, never panicked. At first, every financial decision required conscious effort. They had to stop, breathe, choose the calm response instead of the old anxious one, deliberately every single time. Then weeks later, something happens that reveals the shift has finished. A bill arrives, larger than expected. In the old version of their life, this would have triggered a spiral, checking accounts repeatedly, lying awake doing math, the familiar tightening in the chest. Instead, they open the bill, glance at it, set it on the counter, and continue making dinner. No effort, no internal pep talk, no moment of choosing calm over panic. The calm was simply already there. The way your hand already knows how to find a light switch in a dark room you have lived in for years, without thought, without searching. This is what it looks like when an assumption drops out of the conscious mind entirely and becomes pure behavior. Automatic, unsupervised, no longer requiring your attention to maintain itself. You do not notice these moments while they are happening, because by definition, they do not draw attention to themselves. You usually only notice them afterward, replaying the moment and realizing, with something between surprise and quiet pride, that the old you would have reacted completely differently, and the new you did not even have to try. This is the actual finish line of acting as if, not a dramatic before and after, but an accumulation of small, unremarkable moments where the new identity simply responds first. Before the old one even has time to show up, there is a third and final sign, and it is the one that proves the assumption has become identity rather than opinion. It happens when someone challenges it. Think of a moment where someone close to you, someone who knew the old version of you well, looks at your calm, your certainty, your quiet confidence in something that has not yet visibly arrived, and asks, "Are you sure about this? What if it does not happen?" In the old version of you, this question would have landed like a blow. You would have felt the need to defend it, to convince them, to gather evidence, to prove the assumption was reasonable, because some part of you was still asking the same question. Privately, now picture the version of you who has fully integrated the assumption. The question arrives, and nothing moves. Not because you are ignoring them, not because you are suppressing doubt, but because there is no doubt left in that location to be triggered. You can answer calmly, kindly, without urgency, the way you would answer someone asking if you are sure your own name is your own name. The question simply does not reach anything unstable inside you, because there is nothing unstable left there to reach. This is the real difference between believing something and being someone. Belief can be argued with. It needs defending. Evidence, reassurance. Identity does not argue. It does not need the other person to agree, because it was never waiting for their agreement in the first place. This is what acting as if was always meant to produce, not a temporary performance you maintain through willpower, not a fragile hope you protect from every skeptical question, but a quiet, settled identity so complete that the outside world's doubt simply has nowhere left to land, the dream that arrived uninvited, the bill that no longer triggered panic, the question that no longer required defending. None of these were forced. All of them were evidence that something, which began as imagination, held gently and consistently enough, had finally crossed the only border that matters, the one between pretending and being. You were never asked to fool yourself into a new life. You were asked to feel your way into one so completely that pretending was never actually happening, only remembering in advance who you were always going to become. So the next time you catch yourself trying to act as if, stop trying. Stop arranging your posture, your words, your evidence. Close your eyes instead, and ask only one question. What would this actually feel like if it were already true? Not what would I do? What would I feel? Sit there until the feeling is the only thing left in the room. That is acting as if, finally practiced right. Not a performance for the world to notice, a quiet agreement, settled inside you, long before the world has any choice but to agree as well.